Welcome to FearBound Stories. Please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now let's begin. It was just after 2 o'clock in the morning when the first tones dropped. The firehouse erupted with movement, boots slamming on the floor, helmets grabbed, jackets thrown on in practiced rhythm. The dispatcher's voice echoed through the radio. Structure fire, industrial warehouse on the east end. Heavy smoke reported. Possible entrapment. Captain Morales knew the address. Everyone did. The warehouse had been shut down for nearly a decade. Once a textile facility, it had since become little more than a local eyesore. Windows boarded up, roof half collapsed, graffiti covering its sides. The town had long whispered about it being used for shady purposes, storage for stolen goods, maybe even drug operations. But until tonight, it had never made the news. When Engine 4 arrived, the sky already glowed a dark orange. Flames curled from the roof like grasping hands, and black smoke churned upward into the night. The heat was palpable even from the street, shimmering waves distorting the air. As they approached, Morales barked orders. Team Alpha, entry on the west side. Team Bravo, secure the rear. Search for victims. Report immediately. The metal doors screeched as they forced them open. Inside, it was a choking labyrinth of collapsed shelving and scattered crates. Fire roared above them, chewing through rafters, raining sparks that hissed on their turnout gear. Their flashlights pierced the haze in narrow beams, revealing only fragments at a time. A collapsed table here, an overturned barrel there. It was in the northeast corner that Morales' light froze. Through the rolling smoke, against a scorched wall, sat a figure. Slumped, hunched over, as if it had collapsed mid-stride. The shape was distinctly human. His heart sank. "Possible victim," he shouted, and 2 men broke off to assist. As they drew closer, the details sharpened. Charred skin, blackened clothing fused to flesh. The figure sat with its head tilted down, arms bent unnaturally. Morales' chest tightened. This was no mannequin. This was someone who had died here. Or so they thought. When they lifted it, the weight was wrong. Too light, far too light. The body shifted oddly, not like a corpse, but like something hollow. And when one firefighter's glove brushed its face, the texture was strange. Not skin, not plastic, something in between. Layers of char peeled away like burned fabric, revealing a surface that looked sculpted rather than grown. "Captain," one firefighter muttered, his voice uneasy even through the mask. "This doesn't feel right." "Just move it," Morales barked. "We'll figure it out outside." They carried the figure out into the cool night air, laying it on the asphalt near the paramedics. As the medics bent down, their expression shifted instantly from professionalism to shock. This isn't a mannequin," one whispered, pulling off his gloves. "But it isn't a person either." The firefighters crowded closer. Beneath the blackened surface, the structure was bizarre. Bone-like, yes, but fused strangely, as if joints had been melted together. The teeth looked disturbingly real, each one distinct and perfectly formed. The fingernails were charred but intact, with crescent moons visible under the blackness. It was human, and yet it wasn't. The crew fell into silence, disturbed by what they had carried out of the flames. Some crossed themselves. Others looked away, trying to bury the unease under procedure. Morales told them to focus, to finish clearing the warehouse, but none of them wanted to go back inside. Still, duty drove them. The rest of the warehouse was empty. No other victims, no squatters, No evidence that anyone had been there at all. Just scorched boxes and twisted steel beams groaning as the fire weakened their foundations. By sunrise, the building was little more than a smoldering husk. That morning, investigators arrived. They took photographs, samples, and of course the body. Officially, it was recorded as unidentified remains. But in hushed conversations around the site, firefighters admitted they were relieved to see it taken away. None of them wanted it near the station. Days later, Morales phoned the county medical examiner for answers. What was it? A person burned beyond recognition? A mannequin somehow deformed by the heat? The examiner's reply was chilling. It wasn't what we thought it was. When pressed, he refused to elaborate. Files were sealed. No autopsy report was ever released publicly. And then the rumors began. Some said the warehouse had been used decades earlier for experiments. Mannequins designed for fire testing that were built with real bone for realism. Others swore it was a person who had been deliberately altered, bones fused, body reshaped, then left to burn. But the firefighters who carried it out told a different story. They claimed they felt it shift in their arms, as though something inside resisted being moved. One swore he heard a faint crack, not of burning wood, but of a rib bending under pressure, like a final breath pushing against its cage. Months later, the crew responded to another fire, a derelict strip mall across town. In the ruins of a storage unit, one firefighter found a charred mannequin arm, fingers curled unnaturally. He swore it twitched when he touched it, though the others laughed nervously and told him it was just the heat warping plastic. But he never forgot. None of them did. Now, whenever they sit at the firehouse late at night drinking burnt coffee and trading stories, someone always brings it up. The figure they found in the warehouse, too light to be a real body, too detailed to be fake. Something that sat waiting in the smoke, as if it had been there all along. And though they don't speak of it in official reports, they have their own name for it. A name passed around in whispers. The Burning Mannequin. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It was supposed to be a routine call. An old brick apartment complex downtown, 3 floors, mostly families with children. At 3:17 a.m., the alarm went out. Heavy smoke showing from the second floor. Fire units rolled up within minutes, sirens cutting through the night as neighbors stood outside in their pajamas, clutching blankets and watching their homes burn. The building's upper windows glowed with the flicker of fire. Black smoke poured from broken glass, curling upward into the sky. Children cried. A mother screamed that her daughter was still inside. The crew from Engine 12 didn't hesitate. They grabbed their gear, pulled on their masks, and entered through the main stairwell. Inside, the air was thick and suffocating. The fire roared somewhere above, but here the sound was muffled, distorted by the smoke. The visibility was nearly zero, and the only way forward was to stay low. Flashlights piercing the haze in narrow cones. Firefighter Dan Carter led the way down a narrow hallway. His team fanned out behind him, methodically sweeping each door. Most apartments were empty. Tenants had already evacuated. But there was always the possibility of stragglers, people hiding in closets or under beds. Then Carter heard it. A voice, faint at first, but clear enough to stop him in his tracks. A child's voice, high and trembling, calling, "Help me! Please! Help me!" He froze, raising a hand for the others to stop. "You hear that?" he asked into his mask. They listened. For a few seconds, there was only the roar of the fire. Then it came again, more desperate this time. "Help! I'm in here!" The voice came from the apartment at the end of the hall. Carter rushed forward, kicked the door, and swept inside. The room was hazy, filled with smoke, but not yet fully engulfed. He shouted through his regulator, "Fire department! Call out! Where are you?" The voice answered, a girl's voice. "Closet, please hurry." Carter dropped to one knee, scanning the floor. His beam caught the closet door across the room. He hurried to it, yanked it open, and swept his light inside. Empty. He stepped back, stunned. No child. No one. Just a small, smoke-stained closet with a few wire hangers swaying slightly as if they'd just been touched. "Nothing here," he muttered into his radio. "Sounded like a girl's, but it's empty." The rest of the crew moved in, checking under the bed behind furniture. Nothing. Then the voice came again, this time from behind them. "Please don't leave me." Carter spun, flashlight sweeping the corners. His beam fell across the wall, and for just a fraction of a second, he swore he saw the faint outline of a child, small, crouched, with wide, staring eyes. Then it dissolved into smoke. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. "Captain, I think we got a false lead here," Carter said shakily. But the captain's voice came through grim. "We just had a mother outside tell us her daughter's been gone for 5 years. Died in this building. Same apartment you're in now." Carter felt his blood run cold. He looked back at the closet, the empty hangers swaying slowly in the smoky air. The team pulled back, but the voice followed them. As they retreated down the hallway, the cries grew fainter, more distorted, yet always just behind them. "Help me. Don't leave me. Please." By the time they made it out, the fire had taken hold of the second floor completely. The apartment where Carter had heard the voice collapsed into flames. Back outside, in the harsh glow of the fire truck's spotlights, Carter removed his mask, gasping for air. His face was pale, eyes wide. The mother who had screamed earlier stood nearby, clutching a photo in her hand. It was a picture of a little girl with curly hair and a shy smile. "She used to hide in that closet," the woman whispered to the firefighters. "When she was scared. That's where we found her when the fire got her. She never made it out." Carter didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared at the burning building, flames devouring the windows where the voice had called his name. Later that night, back at the firehouse, he swore he still heard it. When he was alone, cleaning his gear, the faint echo of a child's plea drifted through the hiss of the water hose. "Please, don't leave me." And even now, years later, Carter avoids that block of the city whenever he can. Because sometimes, in thick smoke, with the heat pressing in and the roar of fire overhead, he hears that same voice, weak, trembling, begging, a voice that doesn't belong to anyone living. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It began with a phone call at 12:41 a.m., a frantic neighbor reporting flames inside the old Harris residence on Hawthorne Street. The dispatcher's voice came calm but urgent over the radios. "Residential structure fire. Possible occupants evacuated. Repeat. House fire on Hawthorne." Engine 7 and Ladder 3 rolled out into the night, their sirens breaking the silence of the sleeping neighborhood. The streets glistened with dew under the street lamps as the trucks pulled up to the cul-de-sac. By then, nearly the entire block had gathered on their lawns. Neighbors stood barefoot on the grass, some clutching children, others holding their phones out, recording the nightmare unfolding across the street. The Harris family, a mother, a father, and their teenage son, stood shivering under blankets near the mailbox. Their faces were pale, their eyes wild, coughing into their sleeves. The house itself looked like something out of a nightmare. Flames writhed behind the living room windows, curling upward in tongues of orange and red. Smoke poured from the chimney, as if the house itself were exhaling. The glow was so intense that shadows of onlookers stretched across the street like black, twisted specters. The first crew moved fast. They dragged lines up the driveway, water hissing as it struck the siding. Another team forced entry through the front door, masks on, axes in hand, flashlights cutting beams through the thick black smoke. Inside, the fire was violent but concentrated, burning along the walls and spreading toward the staircase. The floorboards crackled under their boots as they advanced room by room. Within an hour, the fire was suppressed. The roof sagged, blackened and soaked, smoke curling lazily from the rafters. The crew stepped outside, exhausted and dripping with sweat beneath their turnout gear. The chief clapped Morales, the captain, on the shoulder. "Good work. She's out." But then it happened. As the firefighters began rolling hoses, a shout cut through the night. "Captain, it's flaring up!" Every head turned. Through the open doorway, flames erupted once again. The living room, which had been blackened and damp, now burned furiously, as if no water had ever touched it. Curtains burst into flame, the staircase lit up like a torch, and the glow spilled out into the yard. "Lines back up!" Morales barked. "Move!" The crew scrambled, dragging hoses into position, blasting the blaze once more. Water roared, steam hissed, smoke poured upward in great choking clouds. Again they suppressed it, beating down every ember until the house was silent. They stayed longer this time. They walked the structure carefully, pulling at charred drywall, prying into crawl spaces, ensuring no hot spots were hidden. Satisfied at last, they stepped outside once more. But 30 minutes later, while the trucks idled and the crew slumped against bumpers catching their breath, the fire returned. It didn't sputter up like an ember. It exploded. Flames leapt through the roof, windows blew outward in showers of glass, and the house was once more an inferno. For a moment no one moved. They stood frozen, staring at the impossible sight. Then as one, they charged back in. This time, firefighters swore the flames behaved unnaturally. They climbed the walls in patterns, not random curls of heat and smoke, but deliberate spirals, jagged symbols etched in fire. One rookie pointed his flashlight at a living room wall and gasped. There, blackened into the plaster, was a set of scorch marks forming interlocking circles and lines. Not the chaos of fire damage, but markings that looked drawn. "Just patterns," Morales snapped, though his voice cracked. "Heat patterns. Focus." But even as he said it, he felt something in his gut, a twisting unease. Because the symbols weren't just on one wall. They were on three. Spirals burned into the ceiling, jagged marks streaking down the stairwell. Shapes no fire inspector would ever be able to explain. They knocked the blaze down again. This time they stayed even longer, checking every inch. Yet even as they stood in the smoldering ruin, the air seemed to pulse with heat, as though the house itself were breathing. Finally, the chief ordered them out. The structure was declared unsafe. They left the scene behind, exhausted, shaken, and confused. But the story didn't end there. By daylight, the fire inspector arrived to assess the damage. What he found unsettled him deeply. Though the house was gutted, the burn marks were unmistakable. Spirals, crosses, jagged shapes carved into beams and door frames. More disturbing still, he realized the wood bore scars from previous burns. The same walls had been replaced years earlier after another unexplained fire in the very same house. When confronted, the Harris family finally admitted the truth. This was not the first blaze. In fact, it was the third. Small fires had started years before, always dismissed as faulty wiring or an unattended candle. But each time, They had spread faster than seemed natural, always starting in the same rooms, always burning in strange patterns. And then the mother, her voice trembling, revealed what she had never told the neighbors. The lot where their house stood had once belonged to another family. In the 1940s, a farmhouse had stood there. One night, that house burned to the ground, killing 3 children who had been trapped upstairs. Rumors whispered that the family had dabbled in things they shouldn't have, rituals that involved fire. The Harrises had dismissed it as neighborhood folklore, until now. That night, the gutted remains of the house reignited once again, though no crews were called this time. Neighbors said they saw the flames rise high in the dark before burning themselves out by dawn, leaving only a blackened skeleton behind. The property was condemned, the house demolished within weeks. But firefighters who responded to that call still speak of it in low voices. They talk about how the fire seemed to pulse and breathe, how it waited until they thought they had won before roaring back, stronger than before. They remember the symbols seared into the walls, patterns that looked almost alive, shifting when no one was watching. Some claim the smell of burned wood still lingers on Hawthorne Street. Others say if you pass the empty lot late at night, you can see a faint orange glow flickering in the grass, like flames trying to rise again. The neighbors moved on. The Harris family never rebuilt. But for the men who fought that blaze, the memory never left. They had faced countless fires before, but this was the only one that fought back. And though they would never write it in a report, they all knew the same truth. Some fires don't burn because of sparks or wiring or gasoline. Some fires burn because they want to. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The call came just before 2 a.m., the kind of hour when the city feels unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. Dispatch reported light smoke inside Madison Towers, a 30-story high-rise in the financial district. The building was mostly offices, with only a skeleton crew of security guards working overnight. A minor call, most thought, until the dispatcher added a strange detail. Possible screams reported. Origin unknown. Security staff shaken. Engines pulled up to the front plaza, lights painting the glass facade red. From the outside, there was no visible fire, only faint wisps of smoke drifting from the roof vents. The air smelled acrid, the bitter tang of burning insulation. Inside the marble lobby, the firefighters found 3 security guards waiting. The men looked pale, sweating despite the cool night. One of them stammered, "We heard someone screaming from the elevator shaft. We thought someone was trapped, but all the elevators are here. All of them." The firefighters exchanged uneasy looks. Elevators weren't uncommon places for emergencies, but screams coming from every shaft at once. That was something else entirely. Captain Lewis ordered the lobby cleared. The crew pried open the nearest set of elevator doors. Beyond, the shaft stretched into darkness, a vertical tunnel lined with steel rails and cables disappearing both upward and downward. Smoke drifted lazily within, illuminated in their flashlights like ghostly fog. Then, faint but unmistakable, came a sound. A scream. It rose from the depths of the shaft, muffled by concrete but human. Raw, agonized, echoing upward. The firefighters froze. Even through their masks, the sound clawed at their nerves. "Someone's down there," one of the rookies said firmly, already clipping on a rope harness. Blake, the most experienced, volunteered to descend. He clipped in, adjusted his mask, and dropped into the shaft, flashlight beam cutting through the smoke. The ropes creaked as he went lower, boots brushing the rails. At 30 feet, the scream came again, louder. It ricocheted up the shaft, distorting into a hollow metallic wail. Blake shouted, "Hang on! Fire department, I'm coming!" He went deeper. 50 feet, 75, 100. Each time the voice seemed just below him, retreating into the shadows. His beam illuminated cables, pipes, rivets, but no person. Finally, at 120 feet, he reached the bottom. His boots splashed into stagnant water pooled in the sump pit. Rats scurried into cracks. He swept his light across the concrete. Empty. No victim, no body, nothing but dust, cables, and shadows. Negative visual, he muttered into his radio. Shafts clear. And then it happened. The scream erupted again, not from below, but from above. The men at the top staggered back from the open doors, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The sound had come from just behind them, yet the lobby was empty. Blake froze, tilting his light upward. For an instant, his beam struck something halfway up the shaft. A face, white, pale, pressed against the smoke, mouth open in a silent howl, eyes black pits. Then it dissolved like ash in the wind. "Pull me up!" Blake barked, voice tight with panic. "Now get me out!" They hauled him up quickly, ropes snapping against the rails. As he rose, the screaming warped into whispers, faint broken words drifting through the static of his radio. "Help me. Down here. Don't leave me." When Blake finally clambered out into the lobby, his hands were shaking. He tore off his mask, chest heaving. "No one's down there," he said hoarsely, "but something wants us to think there is." The crew resealed the shaft. They searched the building and found the source of the actual smoke. A maintenance closet on the 10th floor, where faulty wiring had smoldered. No serious fire, no casualties. But that didn't explain the screams. Back at the station, Blake revealed something he hadn't said in front of the others. At the very bottom of the shaft, in the dust near the pit, he'd seen footprints. Bare footprints, small, like those of a child, leading into the dark water. When he shined his light back a second time, they were gone. The story spread quickly. Security guards at Madison Towers began reporting strange disturbances. Some claimed they heard voices in the shaft during patrols crying for help. Others swore they saw handprints pressed into the inside of closed elevator doors, fading when touched. One guard quit on the spot after hearing laughter echo down the empty shaft at 3 in the morning. The building management tried to dismiss it as nerves, but word got out. Even today, maintenance workers refuse to use the elevators alone at night. They climb the stairs, no matter how many flights. Some say Madison Towers was built over the site of a burned orphanage, long before the city rose around it. Records are scarce, but whispers persist of a fire in which children perished, their screams echoing into the stone. And maybe that's what Blake heard, descending into that shaft. Maybe the voices were echoes of those lost, trapped in the concrete bones of the building. Or maybe they were something else entirely. Something that lures the living downward, deeper into the dark, knowing once you follow the screams, you may never come back. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The Firehouse on Ashford Street was once the beating heart of the city's firefighting force. Built in 1902, its brick walls had withstood more than a century of winters, storms, and disasters. Its brass pole gleamed from decades of use, worn smooth by the hands of men who slid down it to answer alarms at every hour of the night. Generations of firefighters had called it home, eating at its long wooden table, sleeping in its narrow bunks, and risking their lives together when the sirens wailed. But by the 1980s, the firehouse was no longer needed. Engines had been moved to a larger, more modern station uptown. The men who had once lived and died inside its walls were long gone. For years, the building stood silent, its doors chained shut, pigeons roosting in the bell tower, its windows staring blankly onto Ashford Street like the eyes of an old soldier who had seen too much. When the city finally decided to restore it as a museum, the work crews expected nothing more than dust, rats, and mold. Instead, they began reporting strange things almost immediately. Tools went missing and were later found neatly stacked in locked rooms no one admitted to entering. A contractor swore he heard the firehouse bell clang once, deep and resonant, even though the mechanism had been disconnected decades earlier. Another claimed he saw a man in heavy gear standing in the dormitory doorway, silent, watching him before vanishing like smoke. When the museum opened, visitors came in droves. They marveled at the antique steam engines, the leather helmets blackened with soot, the framed photographs of long-dead captains staring sternly at the camera. Children laughed as they slid down the polished brass pole, not knowing the stories whispered among the volunteers who worked there after dark. The first volunteer to quit was an older man named George. He stayed late one evening cataloging equipment. Around midnight, he heard the heavy tread of boots across the upstairs floorboards. Thinking it was a fellow worker, he called out. The footsteps paused, then continued down the stairs. He stood at the bottom, waiting to greet whoever it was. But no one appeared. The boots stopped halfway down, the sound hanging in the air as if the weight of an invisible man stood frozen on the steps. Then, with one final stomp, silence. George left that night and never came back. Another volunteer, a young woman named Erin, told a story that spread quickly through the local fire department. She had been cleaning a display case when she felt a firm tap on her shoulder. She turned, expecting to see one of her fellow staffers, but the hall was empty. A few minutes later, she felt it again. Stronger this time, enough to make her stagger forward. She fled the building in tears. The most infamous account came from two off-duty firefighters who accepted a dare to spend the night in the museum. They brought sleeping bags, a thermos of coffee, and an old camcorder, intending to prove once and for all that the stories were nothing but ghost tales. The footage they captured still circulates quietly among firefighters, passed from one shift to the next. The video begins casually. The men laugh, give a tongue-in-cheek tour of the displays, point out the ancient helmets and axes. For the first hour, nothing happens. But around midnight, the sound of voices begins to bleed into the microphone. Faint at first, muffled, like men shouting orders in another room. The two firefighters pause, looking at each other nervously. "Do you hear that?" one asks. The voices grow louder, urgent. The camera shakes as the men scramble to follow the sound into the main hall. There, the audio spikes, a chorus of overlapping voices barking commands, the faint clang of metal, the hiss of water. For a moment, it sounds like a fire scene unfolding inside the empty station, the echoes of battles fought decades earlier. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. At 2:17 a.m., the bell tower booms once. The camera jolts as both men jump in shock. They shine their flashlights toward the fire pole. The brass rod trembles violently, rattling in its socket as though someone has just slid down. The men gasp, and then, for just a second, the light catches him. A figure, a man in heavy canvas gear, helmet low over his brow, soot streaking his face. He stands solidly in the beam, one gloved hand gripping the pole, his eyes fixed on the two intruders. The men shout, the camera jerks, and when the light swings back, the figure is gone. The footage ends minutes later as they flee the station, their voices panicked, swearing never to return. Later, historians uncovered the name of Captain Thomas Green. Records showed that in 1946, Green had died inside the Ashford Firehouse during a training exercise gone wrong. A ladder had collapsed during a live burn drill, pinning him beneath flaming debris. Witnesses said he refused to abandon his men, even as smoke filled the hall. His last act, they claimed, was ringing the station bell to signal an alarm, even as fire consumed him. Since then, firefighters believed Green had never left. The staff eventually accepted the presence. They noticed a pattern. When the exhibits were polished and cared for, the nights remained quiet. But when the station was neglected, the disturbances grew worse. The bell clanged more often. The boots stomped louder. The figure appeared more frequently. One staffer reported being shoved down the stairs. Another found her office locked from the inside, though she was alone in the building. Today, the firehouse still welcomes visitors during the day. Families admire the relics. Children play in the shadow of the engines. But after closing, when the doors are locked and the last volunteer leaves, the building returns to silence. And in that silence, the firehouse seems to breathe. The faint creak of boots across old wooden floors, the bell's low, mournful toll from the tower, the shimmer of movement at the edge of vision. Those who've seen him describe the same figure: tall, broad-shouldered, wearing gear from another era, his face blackened with soot. Sometimes he walks the halls as if on inspection. Sometimes he stands at the base of the fire pole, waiting for a call that will never come. And sometimes when the night is stillest, he rings the bell, not for an alarm, not for a fire, but for a captain who still refuses to leave his post. You've just crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown. If you felt the fear tonight, make sure to subscribe before you leave, because on this channel, every story is just the beginning. New nightmares arrive every few nights, each one darker than the last. Until then, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open. You are now part of the FearBound family.